o'clock. Okay, call the meeting to order. Dr. Kobe, are there any communications to the council?
None.
Okay. We give about 30 seconds to a minute to see if anyone wants to communicate anything to the council.
If people would like to communicate, please communicate through the question and answer
And you might,
function.
if you want to communicate, if you could raise your hand so we know that you're in the process of trying to communicate with the council. Dr. Kobe, has there been any
Nope.
communications or anyone raising their hand? No? Okay, so there is no communication to the council and no public comment. Next item on the agenda is the minutes of the meeting of March 11th, 2024.
Make a motion to approve.
Wendell second.
Okay. Okay, anyone want to discuss the minutes of the March 11th meeting? Not. We'll take a vote. Okay, Vice Chair Meaner,
Aye.
Dr. Dr. Bonham.
Aye.
Okay, Council Member Hayashi,
Aye.
Council Member Lee,
Aye.
okay, and then Council Member Hirasan. Sorry, I'm trying to look for. Sorry. Is Mike here? Amasu? Councilmember Amasu? So he voted for the adopting the minutes.
Yes.
Okay, so the minutes have been adopted unanimously. Okay, next item on the agenda is a review of revenues by the Department of Tax.
Sure. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. You guys can see that all right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so welcome everybody. It's good to see you. We are 11 months in to this forecasting cycle, at least as we pertains to calendar or fiscal year 2024. These are the April numbers, right? So these are the last finalized numbers that we have. I want to bring a couple things to your attention. One is the GET. GET has been declining at the very beginning of the year. It was in the 2-3% and had been declining slightly since then. I just it's one thing I always pay particularly close attention to when we have slight shifts in GET. So we had, for the first time in a long time, we had a negative GET reading month over month compared to the previous month of or compared to the same month of the previous year. And that was in April, and later on, I'm going to get to a prelim of the May numbers as well, and we're going to see a similar trend. The other thing I want to highlight is the individual income tax used to be very high and it's gone down, but it's been compensated by the corporate tax, right? So this is the pass-through entities. I'm sure for the people who are accountants, this is one of the new realities, right? So we passed this pass-through entity level that allowed people to pay their taxes at the pass-through entity level in order to not be limited by the SALT deduction of $10,000, right? So this is all of this the type of tax planning reduces the amount of taxable income that's available to the federal government. It should not affect state revenues at all. However, what we're going to find is there's going to be a lot of new shifting, and this is going to make your job and our jobs a little bit more difficult in terms of identifying trends. So,
So
and
Seth,
go ahead.
what kind of entities are these that people are creating?
I don't know if they create them or they already have them, but they're S corps and LLCs, right? And so you can pay your taxes through there, and then deduct that amount paid on your individual income tax.
Okay, thank you.
Right. You do have I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in the future as well later on. But a couple of things. One is withholding on wages, which is, basically our income base, or our wage base down here. It continues to be strong, right? So a lot of the fluctuations are occurring in the estimated taxes. So you see the estimated taxes are lower than the previous year, but that is made up for through corporates. Another thing that I want to highlight is our TAT, while it's not a big move, is slightly down on the year. Does anybody have any questions about that? So all told, we're at 4.7% with 2 months left. That's in comparison to your forecast or the council's forecast of a 4% rate.
So what is the month over month? Just for the month of April versus last year's. April, do you happen to have that? for TAT?
Yes. Sorry, I'm gonna get out of mine. It's if you're comparing April 2023 or 2024 to April 2023, is that what you're asking?
Yes, please.
I think
Yes,
it was
that-
-5.
I have a
5.
2.7% increase.
Yeah, I thought she was talking about just Get, but
Oh, were you talking about Get, or you were talking about all general fund?
No, I was talking about TAT.
Oh, TAT.
Yeah.
That's the one number
Either
I
one.
don't have. Sorry,
Okay.
I apologize.
That's fine, thanks. I
I
was just
have it.
curious.
TAT, you want year over year for the month of April.
Yeah,
I show 2% decline.
okay. Thank you.
Okay. Here's another way of looking at the GET. So in the blue line is fiscal year 2022. The orange line is last year, and the dotted line is the current year, right? So you see that we've been, apart from what was happening in August, which had something related to the Maui fires, we had a pretty continuous and slightly above, and then something came down. We do think that there's a small difference having to do with some new transfers for the county surcharge, but it does not make up for this large of a difference, right? This is a 6.4% decline. So it's just a question mark. I don't usually make big assumptions based on 1 month, but it's something to keep in mind.
So Seth, the large businesses are all paying their excise tax on a monthly basis. Do you have any idea how much of the tax is coming in quarterly?
Yeah, it's like it's in the range of like 5 to 3%. It's pretty small. But what you do notice is if you look at the quarterlies, January tends to be a big year because people kind of put it off and do their reconciliation, and somehow April always tends to be a big year as well. But like you don't really see it in September, which is the other quarter.
So the thing that I was getting at was just that if you look at a back of the spreadsheet calculation, are just based on what's happened in tourism alone, and we know data on how many visitors were here all the way through. We don't have the visitor count through April, but we can estimate that from passenger counts, and we can do that all the way through May. And so we're down, can't remember the number, probably, let's see, we're down on average daily census in March, which would be April collections. We were down almost 20,000 visitors from on average per day compared to a year earlier. And in April, we were probably down around 10,000. So anyway, if you do the math, excise tax should have fallen significantly in the first 6 months of the year. And we haven't seen that. We're not seeing it until just now. So I was just curious whether some of that could just be showing up in that quarterly filing, a piece of it.
Yep. Okay, so this is individual income. I wanted to highlight. So again, same color spectrum. Blue is fiscal year 2022, orange is fiscal year 2023, and the dotted line is our current year. What a lot of the reasons why our individual income tax remains fairly high, over 10% for most of the year, is because it was compared to a low base, right? That was due to the constitutional refund, and it's been chugging along pretty good, nothing major, and then it started to slip here in April, right? And so the question is, what's going on? The answer is corporate income tax, right? So things have been transferred over. This is the corporate income tax. We usually don't pay very much attention to it just because it's so volatile, hard to predict, and a relatively low amount of our overall tax revenue, but that is shifting, right? So what you see is it was quite large in December, and then on their quarterly payments, it's really big in April. And that is the reason, if we go back to here, that's the reason why we're still at 4.7%, because even though individual income tax came down in the collections, corporate income tax came up.
So do we have an idea what's the magnitude of the PTE tax, that the pass-through entities are paying?
Well, it's the same tax rate. They are allowed, they're supposed to claim up to, I think, a 9%.
It's gonna, I think the new law is 9%, but
The new, before it was 11. That was the
Yeah.
highest tax rate.
so this is getting reported at the corporate income tax, right?
Right. So
Previously it would have been mostly at the individual income.
individual.
Yeah.
And if these people excuse me, if these people overpay, they're going to get a larger refund, right? So it really does complicate things, because if these guys are, if you're claiming things at 11%, most people don't have an effective tax rate of 11%. That means they're overpaying, in which case they're going to get a bigger refund at the individual income tax level, right? So this is really complicating our idea and ability to follow trends.
Is it about 100 million, we think, that's being paid? Or do we?
No, I mean, right now this is over 200. It's over $200 million, and it's just the first 2 quarters, right? So if you can think about, for pass-through entities, the only people it really works for is for super high income taxpayers, and those people pay the majority of our taxes, right? So what they do will has really big consequences. What the select number of few taxpayers will have big consequences on collections.
So Seth, just to make sure I understand, I think you were saying that when they pay through pass-through, they're paying at an 11% rate?
They were paying at 11% rate last year. The law changed, and if it's signed in, it's now at 9%.
Okay, so they were paying at 11%, but then because everybody except because most people are not at an 11% marginal tax rate, what you're saying is that then they're going to end up with a refund on their personal income tax.
Correct.
So they're doing this because it saves them money, but it may not make sense for most people if you're paying in extra and then waiting for the refund.
Right.
Okay.
And it also, like, the tax savings from because basically you're just you're allowing to deduct more of your state taxes at the federal
Yeah.
level. By the time you pay a accountant and everything, I think I've been sitting in on a couple of national meetings, and the break even is around $350,000 or $400,000 in salary. Something don't quote me on that,
So
but
I don't have to worry about it.
yeah, not a I haven't thought about it. That's right. Okay, so everything is going smoothly, and now I want to share the preliminary numbers. Now I want to definitely cite that these are preliminary. We have 5 more days, but the GET and the TAT are not going to change very much. So I want to go over this because just so people can understand what's going on. GET is down 2.1%. That's within the range of what we saw last month. That, if from what Carl is saying, can be explained by the decline in tourism, right? And we also see a year-over-year decline in TAT. I would expect these numbers to go up a couple $1 million in the last 5-6 days, but that's it. The big decline is individual and corporate. Now I put those together, and I was looking at what was happening with that, because this is very unusual. And what it seems to be is because the number of payments that were processed in April 2024 were much higher than in April 2023. And the number of payments that were processed in May 2024 were much lower than in May 2023. So everybody's sped up their payments. And this makes sense because if you do the pass-through entity, you have to do electronic filing, right? Whereas if you pay with your individual income, you can send in checks. And those checks tended to show up in our MAIM numbers, and electronic filings show up right away. So what this says to me is there was a worry that we were not going to make the April numbers were not going to match the previous April numbers. Ours did, but that's because we were pulling up a bunch of payments. So I don't expect the number, if we looked at general fund numbers year over year, I do not expect it to be down 17.3% for 2 reasons. One is we still have another withholding payment. We're still going to get a couple more $1 million here, and the rest of our taxes are basically flat to a little bit up, right? But I wanted to show this to you as of where we are right now, because this is a large drop, a large 1-month drop, and it will affect the final general fund number. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Wow. So it could be as much as $100 million lower. Said you still
Yes.
expect some more payments in.
Yep.
Yikes.
And you have to remember, we're also, last year, the legislature passed some pretty big tax credits, right? So the tax credits are being claimed. We doubled the EITC, we increased, doubled the food and excise tax credit, and all that. That was going to come in at around $80 million. So this is about the time that we expect that as well.
Yeah, the other thing that's probably going on here is, you may remember that, during the 2020, 2021, 2022, the share of overall tax collections that was showing up in April grew pretty dramatically.
Yes.
Right. And we may also be backing that out, sort of a return to normal. And
Well,
it just didn't. So a return to more normal, where collections are spread out across the whole year, but then it showed up mostly in May instead of in April because of the shifting.
Yeah, I think the acceleration of collections into April from May, I think that's, no doubt it's going to vary a bit, but I think that's been a pretty permanent change due to just everyone's filing electronically, and the payments are being processed much more efficiently. So kudos to the Department of Taxation, but I think, yeah, just looking back over the years, it wasn't until the last few years that we saw this huge spike in April, and it does appear to come at the expense of May.
Right. And the pass-through entity development has accelerated that. Okay. So just as a reminder, these are the big things that are affecting this year's general fund numbers. The lower base from the constitutional refund. We've had lower estimated taxes. The question is, are they being reset, and to what extent? We're still dealing with the impacts of the Maui wildfires, right? Because people, the decline in tourism in Maui is having an effect, and that's because people are still in temporary housing and have not gotten out of there. Pass-through entity shift, shifting state payments from individual to corporate. We did have this $83 million tax law change, and then this is a new development, right? So the prelim, I think you should really take into account what this is. It's not going to be negative 17.24%, but it is around that, or it's not going to go back to 0, and it's not going to go back to negative 10, right?
So what's it going to be?
I don't know, but it'll be between negative 17 and 0. Yeah, there you go. This is where you're at for the council, right? So you're at 4% for this year, and 4.8 next year, and 4.5 declining. This is just a kind of a steady increase. And as for the model, in terms of your inputs, you are predicting a 4.6% increase this year, 8.6 next year, and 6.5 with a slow decline going forward. And with that, I will stop this presentation unless you have any questions.
Sid, what was the general fund number for June of 2023?
June of 2023, I can get that for you. It is 777 million.
And general fund now for the year for fiscal 23 was a 9, what was it?
9.2 billion.
9.92. Okay.
And that revenue calculator that I sent you has most of the historical numbers in it, in case you want to take a look at that and play with it a little bit.
Carl, you want to lead us off? What are you thinking?
Well, before Seth dropped the bombshell on the May collections, my original thinking had been that really not much has changed since our last meeting, and that my inclination would have been to leave everything alone. But clearly, with those May collections, and honestly, I had always thought that April was going to be quite a bit weaker. I was very, very surprised when the estimated numbers came out for April and they were as strong as they were. I was actually quite worried that our forecast was going to be way too high, and mostly I was worried about that from the perspective of we were sort of getting back to a more normal tax collection behavior where not all the revenue showed up in April. And so I guess I'm not overly surprised that well, minus 17% is a surprise, but I don't think I would have been surprised by a negative read for May that was, in the single digits. Honestly, I don't really know where, how exactly you decide what number to plug into the calculator for May. I plugged in minus 14% and left June at 0. And that essentially gets us to 3% for the current fiscal year. I don't think that's unreasonable. And I guess so now that I've expressed my anxiety over the current fiscal year, going forward for all of next fiscal year, I still don't think things have changed all that much. I mean, there have been some bouncing around, and last meeting we were more optimistic on rate cuts coming down. Obviously, I don't think anybody's very optimistic on very many rate cuts, and I still think we'll see some this year. And our overall view of the macro picture, the U.S. economy, hasn't changed all that much. It's still for continued growth, but market slowing. I mean, we've seen that in the early data, the first quarter data, and consumption data, and so on. The visitor numbers for the state have really just been flat. I mean, since the fall of last year, they've mostly been flat. On Maui, they continue to be declining, and that's a concern. And obviously, with the yen going nuts again, the prospects for any kind of large rebound in Japanese visitors is pretty muted. And so we released our second quarter forecast in I guess it was beginning of May, and it just wasn't that different from our first quarter forecast. And I think that's sort of the way I feel about the council's forecast going beyond this fiscal year. I think that so one thing that has changed that should be showing up in our collections is that at least in Honolulu, inflation has jumped. Our inflation numbers are I'm almost positive they're above the national average right now. So they jumped more than the national numbers, and it's actually pretty puzzling because I don't see the rising rents on Oahu, for example, that are showing up in the CPI data, but that presumably will be raising. I think my forecast for inflation is about 50 basis points higher than the council average, and that'll have a net positive effect on collections going forward. But I guess I would be inclined to not monkey too much with the out years, and to have the hard conversation about how pessimistic, if you want, or maybe realistic, do we want to be about the current fiscal year.
Thank you, Carl.
Well, I think, Carl, the visitor count has been running about 3% lower than last year. So
when I say flat, I'm talking about since last fall, right? I'm not doing a year-over-year comparison. I'm looking at seasonally adjusted data and saying, so basically the visitor numbers slid from last spring all the way through the fall, including the impact of the Maui wildfire. And then there was a bounce back on Maui, once they reopened. And then really since then, it's been mostly flat. Mm-hmm. So yeah, on a year-over-year basis, you're absolutely right. Mm-hmm. The numbers are all down. But thinking about what does that mean? So, that doesn't suggest that next year will be down, right? Next fiscal year. In fact, our consensus forecast is for an improvement in arrivals next fiscal year. And, that may not occur. This summer, I think, is going to be really telling as to whether we get any kind of bounce back that suggests a little bit of growth for next fiscal year. Of course, next fiscal year will be comparing to, right, the depths of the Maui wildfire impact. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's been a little discouraging to see the visitor expenditures also. And what I don't want to be overly pessimistic, but certainly what I've been hearing as far as summer just travel in general, that the airlines are concerned that people are cutting back.
So I pulled up I don't know if I can share my screen or not. I'll see. The chart of arrivals is blue, passenger counts is gray, and we have 1 extra month of passenger counts, right? We have a full month of April for the passenger counts. The blue line ends in March, and then the gold line is the air seats outlook. It's all seasonally adjusted, so that's why you can actually make sense out of it. But I mean, looking at the air seats outlook, I don't, it's the airlines might have some concerns, but it's not showing up in the air seats outlook, right? This reflects what they're telling DBED, right? That they're planning on flying into Hawaii. Any questions, or should I stop sharing there? But I'm hearing the same thing. I mean, I had some conversations with folks in the industry last night, and they're talking about softness. But you always have to kind of take that with a grain of salt, right? What does that mean? Does that mean it's not as good as they thought it was going to be, or does it mean it's down?
Yeah, I recall seeing in a news story that they were talking about how, Hawaii's kind of on sale right now. They're saying that, the summer season, even though it's usually a peak season, they're saying it's almost popping up as a shoulder season, that, they're discounting rates and they're trying to get people to Hawaii. Which, I think their outlook is, that they're not selling out or they're not at the occupancy that they were anticipating. So it did sound like they're getting a little worried from the visitor industry.
And it makes sense, right? I mean, with kind of what we're seeing in the U.S. consumer and the lack of any kind of strong growth in international.
Councilmember Lee, what do you think?
There's definitely a softening. I've been focused more on the real estate side and sales, and I had early brought up insurance has really put a damper on condo sales. Many of the buildings are not fully insured, so sales, if you watch the sales, the inventory has just kind of collapsed, and people are not buying just because, one, borrowing is tough, two, the lenders are not covering a lot of the buildings out here in Kaka'ako especially. So it's a very you kind of, it's like you're projecting this car crash to happen with all of these things happening and inflation, and literally hearing every day people leaving the state. And these are very concerning factors that's going on. And yet I think we've been bolstered by inflation for GET for a while. How far will that take us is kind of my concern, with really a downturn. I just kind of feel this downturn of spending that's going to occur, not only by people leaving, by real estate sales, but tourists themselves. They're just telling you it's too expensive, and that's why I think you're seeing some of the airlines starting to drop prices or canceling some of the routes. So we're in a very kind of precarious situation, and like you said, it is hard to judge right now. I don't think we're at a place where we panic. It's a place of one, I think it's a little bit of wait and see to see how it plays out this summer.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. Councilmember Hamasu, do you have any comments, thoughts?
It's kind of interesting is what Councilman Lee said is also affecting our market, which is the commercial real estate market. And I think I read an article not too long ago about a rolling recession where interest-sensitive industries are impacted more negatively than others, which makes total sense. I'm not quite sure if tourism is interest rate sensitive, but it is economically sensitive in regards to discretionary income being spent for vacations and what have you. And I know Councilperson Maynard is definitely on top of it in regards to knowing where tourism is in terms of how it's impacting the state. So I guess The last time we met, we were more optimistic because we were thinking of there'll be about 4 to 6 interest rate cuts, which never transpired because inflation still remained high. Now we're going into the middle part of the year thinking maybe 1 or 2 is a likelihood, which casts kind of more of a negative appeal or negative pall over my thought process for the rest of this year. Maybe 2025 will be better, but yeah, I still know that there's capital sitting on the sidelines for investment and development and other things related to our industry, but I guess it's not as optimistic as we are, I guess, at the end of the first quarter.
You know, if anybody was counting on 4 to 6 interest rate cuts this year, I mean, the market went nuts, and that's what the market does, right? And anyway, but yeah, 1 to 2 for the rest of the year makes it, I think, is the very best we could hope for. I mean, having said that, our view is that the inflation numbers are going to come down in the second half of this year. We'll see if we're right.
I'm hoping you're right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, one thing that we haven't talked about, we talked a lot about sort of the international conditions, the macro conditions in the US and how that's impacting tourism, and then a little bit about CRE and housing. I just looked at the condo sales and the single family sales on Oahu. Single family sales are up 6% year to date. Condo sales are down. I think they were down 2%, but they're mostly flat, and they're bouncing up and down every time, you know, mortgage rates swing. Right, when we had the retrenchment of mortgage rates, I guess it was I can't remember when it was, last fall maybe, and then, you know, rates went back up when everybody started realizing that inflation was higher, and then the sales go away. But what we haven't talked about is all of the money that's flowing into the state economy from the federal side, right? And actually, if you look at the council's forecast, the consensus forecast for construction, it's, I want to say it, I can't remember what the number was, but the first 2 quarters of the year, construction is up about 10% in terms of the contracting tax base. And I think the council's average forecast was about 5%. Maybe it was a little higher, maybe it was 7%. And, you know, this is just the beginning of the rebuilding on Maui. So the federal dollars flowing in on top of what is happening at Pearl Harbor, for example. But then there's a couple of other things that are coming down that I'm pretty sure that the state has agreements with the teachers, state and counties, with the teachers and with other public sector unions. And in fact, I'm 99% positive that HGEA has signed off on an agreement that's going to inject hundreds of millions of dollars into their pockets for hazard pay during the pandemic, right? And so, you know, that's money that's going to be flowing into the economy. And then as we go further out, the tax cuts will also, well, assuming that the governor signs it, will also start to show up as a economic stimulus in the very near term.
So Carl, do you have any number you want to propose for the current fiscal year?
Well, when I toy with what May should be, and Seth wouldn't tell us. So, you know, I mean, what I hear is -17 is too weak. I plugged in -14 and then 0 for June, and that gets me 2.9% for the fiscal year. I don't think that's unreasonable. If you plug in -15 and 0, you get 2.8%. I don't necessarily think that June is going to be 0. Right? I mean, if you really focus on May as being related to the April-May collections and the acceleration of April, then you probably would pick a number closer to 2 or 3% for June. And even if you went minus 17 for May and plus 3 for June, you get 2.9. So, I mean, I think I would be comfortable with a number like 3. I'm not a big fan of, 0.9s and 0.8s, but whatever. I think that was the question, was about the current fiscal year. So,
So if we do say minus 14, what does that mean as far as, I mean, Seth thought he had pretty much most of the collections in his number.
So what's not in there is, okay, on Mondays and we receive our withholding payments on Mondays and Thursdays. That's when it hits our bank account, right? So a lot of withholding payments, the last year, the last payment in the month is going to be, we're going to receive it tomorrow. So I think at the very least, we're going to get 5 or 6 million through that. And then usually things just trickle in through the days. It's just like not big. And then the rest of the things is, are the other taxes are doing fine, right? They're like 0 to 2 to 3% ahead. It's only about 5% of our tax base, but that's going to really pull up that number, right? Because we're working from a lower number.
So Seth, when you showed that presentation, was that, so these were year over year calculations for the month of May, but the month, when you did that comparison, was it to the full month of May in 2023?
Yes.
So, okay. So I think what you're saying is we're missing a whole week of withholding from
Correct.
that calculation.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, we could actually figure out what that is. It's because the withholding is going to be pretty smooth, right? So it's 20% more, there's going to be 20% more withholding, or even 25.
I thought Seth said he included one payment and there was a second payment that was not included. Is that correct?
Right. So today, the payment that came in yesterday, we did get is included. And so we're going to do one more payment.
Okay. So total, it might be off by 10 million. Trying to pin you down a little bit.
I don't like this. I was already struggling to present all these numbers because they're moving around a lot, but I just felt like given the magnitude, it was important to share them with you. I will tell you, you always look at this and you think, I always look at it 4 or 5 days before and I'm like, oh, we're not going to get there. And then we get another 10 or $15 million and it pulls it up like 1 or 2%, the general fund 1 or 2% up. So I mean, if I had to make a guess, I would say like probably -12 or something for the May, if I had to make a guess, but with a standard errors of like 3% on either side. And then I would expect in June, I think 0 to 3 is like a totally reasonable number.
That's kind of where I started, was minus 12. And I mean, if you go 0, then you get to 3% in June. If you go 3%, you get to 3.3.
Well, I think we can hope for 3.
Okay, I moved 3.3% for the current fiscal year.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion?
What do you think, Scott?
I didn't know that makes sense. I mean, I was I was playing with it, and it dropping it to 3 just seems almost like the sky's falling, right? I mean, it's just such a drastic change, and knowing that there's still one more month that there's going to be some capture there. So that's why I think 3.3 sounds reasonable, and plugging the numbers. that's where I was kind of getting to just by playing with a couple of, trying to get a range for May. So I think 3.3 makes sense and is reasonable.
I think
And just
the
in terms
motion
of
is 3%, I believe.
the magnitude of the changes, you're talking about 1.7% or 1.4% in 2 months of time. So you guys are making a big decision with this.
So can I ask another question? I know I made the motion, but so there are 2 deposits of withholding every week.
Right.
Okay.
The one on Monday, which is for I have to go for if you're going to pay on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, like you have to pay the previous on Monday, and then the rest of the week you're supposed to pay on Wednesday, which hits our bank account on Thursday.
Okay, so let's try and keep this simple. So there's 2 a week, 4 weeks in the month. That's 8 payments. Okay, so if you look at total withholding I just looked at April, it's $252 million. Right, so we're talking about 1/8 of that. That's not in the May collections yet, and so that's like $30 million. It's not 10 million. So that's roughly the difference between 17% and 12%, right? At minus 17, we're talking about 626 million in May, and at minus 12, we're talking about 663 million. So 37 million. And 1/8 of April's withholding is 31.5 million. So we're in the ballpark. So I guess what I'm getting at is that based on what we have month to date for May, just getting one more withholding payment is going to get us to something close to minus 12 or minus 13.
There's also the other taxes, right, that come in
Right.
from the other departments like insurance, and I think, is there still general fund from the Bureau of Conveyance?
Correct.
So,
and then we also have the tobacco tax, some of the alcohol tax, I think. But
yeah, and there's 2. That's another $27 million in taxes, or $20 to $30 million in taxes collected by other departments. So would that not be in the current estimate?
I did not include those in that. I only showed you GET,
Right.
TAT. So all those are going to pull it way up. That's one of the things I've been trying to explain.
So I guess if we were to pull it up 50 million from the minus 17, then we'd have to go to about minus 10%.
Yeah, but Carl, it's not all that. You're comparing it year over year, right? So all the other stuff, it's going to be 0. It's probably going to be like 2% or something. So they'll pull it up, but it's that's not included in the 2023 May numbers I've just presented either.
Right. That's
the numbers you
what
presented. Could you put it up again, Seth? Share that page, because I don't believe we got that in our packet.
No,
I think it was. He hid it from us.
I sneaked it in because I was doing it today. I apologize.
That's okay.
Here you go. Sorry.
So what's in the May 2023 number? Is it comparing the actual day, or is it?
So I've added, I took
see.
the GET, the individual incorporated incomes, and TAT from May 2023, and I added it up.
Okay.
And I took the May 2024
for the
took the
entire month.
GET, the same things and added it up.
So you didn't do it day by day. You, for
Nope.
May 23, you did it for the whole month, the GE,
Right.
individual and TET.
But we're only looking at those categories. We're not looking at everything else.
We are not looking at anything else.
So
So ignore
in the
the
comparison, we don't
don't
have
add
the
the
other
20 million
type
back
of
in.
taxes then. So in other words, if we compare apples to apples, then we still, either the May 23 or May 24 numbers, neither one has like the insurance tax and other type of taxes.
Not in the sum, no. And so the GET number and the T8, they'll change a little bit, but the TAT and GET are not going to change very much, right? Because the payment deadline is the
Yeah.
20th.
The 20th.
It's the individual that will increase,
Because we still haven't gotten the last withholding.
right? And
Mhm.
that's meaningful.
Yeah. So if it goes up about 30 to 40 million.
Still
at
gonna be
least,
down.
been for-
So,
I mean,
so go ahead.
I think your assumptions, Carl, are totally reasonable. You know,
Yeah, if you add 30 million in versus this calculation, you get roughly a minus 13%. And if you adopt 3% for the month of June, you get 3.2%. I think I proposed 3.3, which I'm still comfortable with.
I thought you had proposed 3.
Did I?
No, 3.3.
I think he said 3.3, right? 3.3.
That's what I
Yeah, I
thought.
heard 3.3.
Hmm.
So Christie's having cold feet.
No, it's Christie's number.
It seems a little high. I'm just more concerned. Yeah. I thought it was 3%, but maybe I was just being delusional.
I guess that the other thing, I think Kurt had already asked about what June of last year looked like, right? Is there, whether there's any reason to think that we might have a June surprise, so to speak?
the only thing that I would think about is it's the estimated tax payments, right? So
Mhm.
people pay in June. If you think that's going to swing one way or the other, that's one of the things that you really got to pay attention to.
That was a big help.
I know I'm not supposed to give my opinion, but I'll give you my opinion. I don't see why June's going to be that much different from the previous Junes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't either, as that's probably baked in from April anyway. It's not, that payment doesn't usually change that much.
Sid, did the governor sign the PT law already? Is
Good
that
question.
still
I don't
pending?
I don't know.
Okay.
But I do know it was effective starting January 1st, 2024. If you signed it.
Well, Chrissy, did you want to clarify? You had seconded Carl's motion. I thought it was
Yeah.
3.3.
I
Did
had used the minus 12 for May and 0 June over June and got 3%. So I was
3%.
probably just looking at my own numbers. But I'm okay with the 3.3. I'm hoping we get there.
Seth, can I ask you
So-
a question? Oh,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead, Carl. Oh, so for the April number, because that came in, I agree with Carl that I think even our last meeting we were concerned about what the April tax collections would be, and it came in, basically higher than we were expecting. But was that trend similar that what you saw in May? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out whether or not some of that makeup is because as we're seeing the acceleration of taxes, And is it primarily GET that was the reason for it, or was there still a drop in the corporate and individual income taxes? Because I'm wondering whether or not part of either the GET payments in that April was masking some of the I guess people's forecast for what their true income tax liability may be on an individual and corporate level, which would cause the June estimates to be lower. So do we know what the makeup of the April payment was?
I'm sorry, are you asking that there was some kind of overlap between GET and individual income?
No, when I'm looking at the model that we get, and then it's 1.2, $1.3 billion, right, is what the collections were in April. So I'm just trying to figure out whether or not, because we've been talking about how some of it's the April numbers are growing primarily because some of the acceleration from May and payments and other types. I'm just trying to see if there's a trend from a income tax perspective, whether that's continuing to drop and whether we see a drop, from year in April of this year, and then whether that drop in the individual income taxes and corporate taxes, the income taxes are going to continue on in June. Because once again, I think part of where the thinking here is right, because there's going to be the June estimate that's going to prop things back up from an income tax perspective, right?
Right, and that happens every year. What we are seeing is a compression in terms of estimated tax payments. So whereas before it was 5 years ago it was really distributed between May and June. Now it's been over the last couple of years, it became more and more April. Now it's almost entirely in April, right? And so if we were to use the same logic, then we would assume that like more would hit in June and less would spill over and hit in July.
So, Seth, I have a question, and I don't remember. So I'm looking at the data that we collect. I think this is actually from the monthly releases, and I'm showing a huge negative number for May estimated taxes. And if I remember right, there was some kind of I can't remember what the, let me double check that I'm not.
Are you looking at our booklet?
No. Is that in the booklet? Do we have the
It is
data?
in the booklet, but I mean, if we want to talk about the booklet, we can. There are some negative estimated tax payments, but that had to do with some accounting
Right
issues.
But still I mean, we're going to be comparing May of this year to May of last year. And
right.
So we actually should end up with a big swing in estimated tax payments in May of this year. I guess doesn't necessarily follow, right? Because the year over year comparison is very favorable. Whether or not people are generating the income to make estimated tax payments this year, we're still going to have a positive comparison because last year of the accounting changes or I don't know what it was.
Yeah. And then last year, just to put things in perspective, the general fund tax collections were 754 million last year, May 2024. And then it increased to 777 million in June. So it increases a little bit, not much.
Well, we have first and second. Any more discussion? Okay, so we'll take a vote. For the current fiscal year, motion on the table is for 3.3%. Vice Chair Maynard,
Aye.
Dr. Bonham.
Aye.
Councilmember Hayashi,
Aye.
Councilmember Lee,
Aye.
Councilmember Hamasu.
Aye.
So the vote carries unanimously at 3.3 for the current fiscal year. Okay, for the next fiscal year 2025, so we're gonna have a smaller lower base. Dr. Bonham, you want to lead us off?
mean, like I said originally, I'm not inclined to change the out year forecasts.
Okay.
I don't think that the overall economic outlook has changed that much. And honestly, I think the council is as a group, the consensus forecast for sort of the non-tourism part of the economy is too weak, particularly for construction. And remember, most of the construction activity we're talking about is pretty interest insensitive. It's not really being driven by, by people building new homes that they're financing.
So are you proposing to keep
Yes.
the forecast the same?
I mean,
for
I'm not making a motion. I'm discussing, and my view is that the current forecast is reasonable.
Would you happen to know what the of the total construction dollars, what percentage is actually government sponsored?
Yeah, I should be able to figure that out. And I mean, there's a disconnect between, so the number that we're inputting into right, our surveys is contracting tax base, and we don't have that broken out in any form, right? It's just total tax base. But if you look at the share of total permits in dollar values, the share in 2023 for government by our estimate, so these are, our estimates are smoothed out because we're taking the really, really large awards that that are counted in that data, for example, for the work at Pearl Harbor, and we're spreading it out over the work period instead of treating it, because all the money wasn't spent when the contract was announced. So anyway, we get over half of permits in 23 and 24 and 25. 25 is half our government. If you go back to pre-pandemic, the number is more like a quarter. The average from 2017 to 2019 is about maybe 25%. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Thanks, that actually helps identify what is the most vulnerable in terms of construction that relies on financing.
And actually, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff in the government side, that's highly uncertain. I mean, obviously the rebuild on Maui, and there's stuff that we haven't included that we should, like Mayor Wright, for example, which appears to be moving forward. I guess what I'm getting at is that I think there's a pretty good chance that we've underestimated the amount of public dollars going into construction projects.
Because Carl, the numbers also include the new potential stadium, because there's a drop dead date on that one, right? When it's supposed to be completed by the first game, so it's ready for the first game of, I forgot which season it is, but
no, we definitely are not forecasting the stadium. We'd like to have a little more clarity before we start.
Like the rail.
Actually, I suppose, you go out farther, there's quite a bit of uncertainty because of the election as well.
Well, I would agree with Carl that construction is a positive on the horizon. These higher rates certainly have slowed down other things. Even though I'm looking at the sales year to date on single family and condos, single family is up year over year, but if you look back to 2022, we're down 32%. Condos were down 4%. We look back to 22, we're down 41%. So that's certainly a negative on the economy. And the current forecasts, which are always wrong, but the rates are going to stay up a little bit higher for longer. So that is a concern. I think the fact that our visitor arrivals have slowed down recently, I'm concerned about that too. Jobs still aren't back to where they were before COVID, so we have some problems there. And we've lost population, which those two things are probably not unrelated. So again, a concern along those lines. So a lot of concerning things, but I would agree with Carl that construction does seem to be on the, one of the bright sides. But yeah, and the insurance problem with condos is certainly significant, and the reason why that has, it's not that banks don't want to lend. Speaking as a former banker, but Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae will not take loans on condos that aren't 100% insured. So,
does anybody understand that? It's like, why would you insure a concrete building 100%?
Yeah.
I just don't understand.
Rules, Yeah. But that is the case. So these loans cannot, if the insurance is not there, these loans cannot be sold to Fannie and Freddie. So it certainly is an obstacle in that whole market. Affordability, of course, is always a challenge, but high interest rates and having to, you can still buy it all cash. Not everybody can do that. So
Christy, I guess what I'm thinking and asking is how much of this is different, right, than what we were thinking in March. And
can't tell.
I mean, maybe, I don't know, we did lower our construction forecast a tad, and our certainly our condo price forecast came down some because of the extent of the insurance problem. So I think that's a little bit more of a negative. And instead of 3 interest rate cuts, I think we're now still thinking 2. I think we'll get 2, but we'll see. And then I don't think our visitor forecast changed hardly at all since last March.
I think that's the persistence of the weakness has been concerning to me. It wasn't just a one-off sort of last few months. It's been pretty.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've been forecasting that for quite a while. But then that's because if you go back 6 months to a year, you go back a year and a half, we were forecasting U.S. recession. So the U.S. visitor market looks about like we thought it would. So I guess to me, the most concerning thing would be if the U.S. economy, tipped deeper into a slowdown or a recession, obviously.
So, Carl, Christy, I guess one of the things that you guys were touching on, which I didn't think about till just now, and I'm wondering, because I would agree, I think what we're seeing on the construction side, especially large projects, Maui, the other DoD projects, other types of stuff, it's creating a kind of, they're not able to staff everything, even from a construction perspective. So is that going to cause kind of, would that reverse some of the loss? Because people are going to say, well, wait a second, you know, guys that moved to Vegas to find construction jobs now may come back home because they can get the work. You know, I know that all the contractors are hiring, looking for people, including, you know, NAFAC and others. So could that kind of stem some of it and kind of reverse what some of the losses that we're seeing?
Well, so I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but we're now, I think as of the data for April, we're at record high construction job count. Over 41,000 construction workers. We've never seen that number before, and frankly, I don't know where we're going to find the extra 1,000 or 2,000 more that might be needed if you were to really accelerate rebuilding on Maui. And so we have always operated under the assumption in our forecasting that we're going to see some in-migration, at least of temporary construction workers, whether or not you have a return. And so that'll slow progress, that'll slow work, that'll raise costs. And then we also have, I'm pretty sure we've got negotiations starting or already underway for labor, for unionized contractors. And so I think there's some room for cost increases there that will might not impact the federal work so much as it does act as a drag on, right? You could see some substitution going on, not substitution, but crowding out, if you will, right? The federal projects and the federal money sort of crowding out some of the private. So you certainly could imagine if costs start to go up again in a pretty significant way, you know, a hotel owner thinking twice about doing their renovations kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think we were seeing that, and Mike, I'm curious to hear your comments on it. But you know, when the interest rates started going up, you know, a lot of development, some of the larger projects kind of got put on hold because, you know, the financing numbers didn't make sense, and so suddenly, you know, that's been the shifting has been more towards the government work, and so I'm just wondering, Mike, you know, is that continuing on?
Yeah, I've actually come across a couple of developers that have postponed or delayed the sale of condos or sale of you know, their commercial developments as a result of interest rates. I mean, they're just not able to make anything pencil because of the increased borrowing costs. But also, you know, as you all mentioned, inflation has not disappeared. So material pricing, and you already mentioned labor pricing, have all posed to be a damper on any kind of future development. I mean, if it's government sponsored, that's why, I mean, if that's insulated, as Carl mentioned, then that's great. But, you know, if it's 50%, that leaves you with 50% that isn't interest rate insulated, so to speak. So you have, I'm still kind of perplexed that construction is so hot, yet, you know, you have interest rates that are high and cost of development is at a level that we haven't seen in a while, and yet, you know, construction.
But we remember, Mike, interest rates aren't that high. They're only high compared to the crazy lows that we experienced, you know, immediately post financial crisis and during the pandemic, right? I mean, actually a 4% 10-year bond rate, or 4.5 is about where it should be. I mean, we're very close to back to normal.
Yeah, well, let me run a question by our former banker, because I've talked to a bunch of banks recently, and when I talk construction loans, they have increased their underwriting restrictions and made it even more difficult for them to secure any loans. Yet, I mean, what's the bottom line there?
Well, there may be several reasons for that, including, and as I'm speaking as a former banker, regulatory oversight becomes more, you get more scrutiny, I should say, when there are especially with commercial real estate, the regulators are really focused on that. And they lump into that construction loans. So they're seen as being more risky, of course, because you don't have a finished product and you're lending money as if you have a finished product. And if something happens, you might have a shell of something that's hard to get rid of. So it is a riskier type of lending. And most institutions do have a limit, usually as some sort of percent of their capital, how much they'll do. And now a lot of things, just as you were saying, Mike, a lot of things don't pencil out because it was one thing when prime was at 3.25, and it's quite a different thing when prime is at 8.5. You've got interest rates that are 2 or 3 times higher than where they were before, and all of a sudden it doesn't make sense anymore. So it is more difficult. But there is more regulatory scrutiny on commercial real estate in general, and construction loans are seen as more risky.
And what you were describing, part of that was the project not penciling out, but there's also the side of it that if the banks are under pressure already, right? I mean, the flat yield curve also is a real problem.
Yeah.
And bank capital, can be a problem. I'm not suggesting that any of our local banks are in that situation, but
no, we don't. I think our banking industry in Hawaii
It's kind of interesting.
is very good, so very strong. So I don't want to give a different impression.
yeah.
But certainly regulators are looking, especially at commercial real estate, and we are very lucky in Hawaii. Our property values have kept up, but you've heard about, apartment buildings in San Francisco that are selling for a quarter of what they were built for, or, so it's certainly something that regulators are focusing on.
Does anyone have any motion for a number? Carl, you had mentioned maybe keeping it the same.
That would be my suggestion. I'm happy to make that motion if no one else wants to say anything.
Okay, you want to make the motion?
I move that we leave all the out years unchanged.
Okay, so it stay at 4.8 for the next fiscal year 25, then 4.5, 4, 3.5 for the last 3 years.
I'm trying to find
This is on
my
table 1
booklet.
of our booklet, table
Yeah.
1. So 4.8 for fiscal year 25, 4.5 fiscal 26, 4% fiscal 27, and 3.5 for the last 3 fiscal years, 2028 to 2030.
I'm comfortable with that. And if you look at table 1, you'll also notice that our model is telling us we ought to be much higher.
Yeah, I see that.
I don't necessarily agree with that. So I'll move that we adopt the fiscal 25 to fiscal 30 forecast that's in table 1, the same as we had last time.
Any second?
Wendell, second.
Okay, any second? Any further discussion?
And just to point out, that's a percentage from where we're going to end up, right? So
Yes.
since we're ending up at a lower number, it will be a lower
Yeah.
number moving forward.
Yeah, because
Right,
we're dropping
going
the
forward,
base year,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
From 4 points. I think we were
I
4.6. We're
I had a
dropping it.
question in regards to if the outlook is less optimistic or more pessimistic, would it be more prudent to go lower than 4.8 in terms of 2025?
We're dropping the base, right, from 4 to 3.3. But do you,
So you're concerned that 4.8 is too high?
you thinking that's too high?
Possibly, especially if inflation is sticky and interest rates remain sticky, we might. And I mean, I still hear talks about recession out there quite a bit. So I don't know if is 4.8 realistic? I mean, from based on what, I guess you have more history with this than I do.
I guess what I've been arguing is that the outlook isn't all that more pessimistic than what it was in March. And some of that is about, trying to disentangle the noise from the signal. And I would argue that particularly with respect to inflation, a fair amount, and then as an extension to interest rates, a fair amount of what we saw in the first part of this year was noise. That's my view on it. Some of it's seasonality. The seasonal adjustment has become incredibly hard post-pandemic, and so we're actually, I think so. What happens is the seasonal adjustment at the beginning of the year, it tends to make the inflation numbers higher, and in the back half of the year, I think we're going to see the opposite effect. So in other words, I think inflation will come down, and the data that I look at on rents, which has been as you know, has been a huge piece of the inflation story, has been. So there's BLS has a time series on new leases, and it's not, it's not looking at Zillow or other market-based indicators of rents. So they're doing their own. I think it's probably an experimental series, and that leads the owner's equivalent rent and basically the shelter component in the CPI by 2 to 3 months. It suggests to me that those are going to come down maybe as much as 150 basis points in the second half of the year. So anyway, our view is that inflation is going to come down, and we could be very near target some maybe early to middle of next year. I know that's not the consensus view, but I guess I would argue that the consensus view is all over the map and jumps every time there's a new data point, and most of that's noise. So, I could be wrong. But I guess I'm just not that. There is still, obviously there's still a risk of a recession, and it's certainly non-zero, but I'm not sure it's a heck of a lot more than average risk, right? So something like 15 to 20% probability. I mean, the normal, any given year you have about a 15% probability of recession. I'm not sure it's all that much elevated from that.
Councilmember Hamasu, do you want to say anything more about our forecasts and why it might be too optimistic?
No, I wanted to hear some pushback and
You got it. But
Some
having said
feedback.
that, the difference between 4.5 and 4.8 is from a forecasting perspective is, that's budget dust, but the legislature will care about it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm willing to go along with the consensus. I just wanted to be a contrasting opinion here regarding the outlook in terms of where general tax revenues would be. But yeah, I think I'm willing to agree with the 4.8 if that's what my colleagues agree to.
When is our next general fund meeting?
Well, we'd probably be beginning of September. And I guess I think about it too in terms of, we're supposed to be, I guess we should treat them all equally, but September is obviously important for the administration to set the budget. And, our March meeting, that's when the legislature has to determine the budget. So those are very key meetings. Okay, any other discussion about the motion made by Carl to keep the forecast the same and seconded by Councilmember Wendell Lee? Okay, Vice Chair Maynard?
Aye.
Dr. Bonham?
Aye.
Councilmember Hayashi?
Aye.
Councilmember Lee?
Aye.
Councilmember Hamasu?
Aye.
And the vote carries unanimously.
Reluctantly.
All of the forecasts the same without years from fiscal 2025. Okay, next item on the agenda is budget and finance. Mr. Chen.
Good afternoon, Chair and council members. My name is Donovan Chun. I'm with the Department of Budget and Finance. We have provided you our report of revised projections of general fund non-tax revenues, non-general fund tax and non-tax revenues since the March 11th meeting. The revenue estimates were prepared by departments in April and were based on point-in-time assumptions made by programs and department staff. Our report includes a summary of the significant changes, and I did want to highlight 3 items. On table 4A, sorry, I don't have that available. Hang on. It was in your packet. Sorry. No. Apologize. Share this. Can you see that? Okay, so on table 4A, under non-revenue receipts, there's an increase in fiscal year 24, and that's attributed to the transfer of general funds to the Stadium Development Special Fund. This is in preparation for the redevelopment of the stadium. That was 49.5 million. And then that's under non-revenue receipts right there. And then on table 5A, under charges for current services, there's a net increase in fiscal year 23 that primarily reflects updated amounts of actual reimbursements received for the medical assistance program at DHS. And then under the non-revenue receipts for fiscal years 24 through 26, it reflects anticipated insurance proceeds for various state agencies resulting from the 2023 Maui wildfire incident. That is currently going to DAG's risk management. That's 20 million, 80 million, and 100 million respectively. So those are projected insurance reimbursements for facility damage. And those are the only things I wanted to highlight. Any questions?
Are the non-revenue receipts primarily insurance payments or how is
It can be various things, but in this case, so in our report, we talk about significant items over $5 million. In this case, I pointed out items that the largest things, and that one was that reimbursement for damages to state facilities in Lahaina, which are within various departments. So that's the projected reimbursement from the insurance companies for those buildings. The cost will likely be more than that, but there are other sources for those repairs.
Well, here, okay, here's one way. One way to do this is take part A and yes, extend it 3 more months. Part B stays.
Any questions?
But we do an interim safety analysis. The primary analysis is the big part. But even though
Any
we
questions
do
on
an
Mr. Chung?
Interim safety evaluation.
Thank you.
On the interim safety.
Okay. Any motion?
That would trigger move ahead.
We need a motion to accept the
Accept.
report. Yeah,
Adopt
So
the-
moved.
I'll second.
Okay. Vice Chair Maynard,
Hi,
Dr. Bonham? Is that a yes, Dr. Bonham?
Aye.
Okay,
Sorry, I was
Councilmember
muted.
Hayashi,
Aye.
Councilmember Lee,
Aye.
Councilmember Hamasu.
Aye.
Okay, so Mr. Chun's report and BNF prepared for BNF is approved unanimously. Okay, last item in the agenda is the next meeting, which would be on personal income. Dr. Kobe, when's the reporting date for that?
September 10th.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is
Oh,
August.
no, that's, I'm sorry, that's for August.
Yeah, August 1st, so
It's August 1st, yeah.
August 1st.
So.
August 5th.
August 5th.
Yep.
What I heard.
So the reporting date is August 5th, which is Monday. Any suggestions? July.
I could do July 30th or August 1st
August 1st?
or July 30th.
Any preference for August 1st or July 30th or 31st?
Either works.
Dr. Kobe, how long will you guys?
Well, if we do July 30th, if we do August 1st, then we will have the the June visitor data, and we'll have almost all of the July tax data, I think.
This is for total personal income.
Oh, never mind. Well, the visitor data still matters.
Yep.
So you would prefer August 1st, Carl?
Yeah.
Is Dr. Kobe?
Later's always better, except for
gives you more
GoTex.
time. Does that give you sufficient time?
Yeah, as long as
Yeah.
you guys reply and approve the letter
the next
quickly.
day? Okay, so how is 2 o'clock on Thursday, August 1st?
Works
for me.
Yep.
So if that's good for everyone, then next meeting for personal income will be Thursday, August 1st at 2 p.m. Okay, well, everyone, thank you very much, again, for your contributions and all your input today. And I'll see everyone on August 1st.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
And Kurt and Christy, I'll get you the letter tomorrow morning.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Great. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.